My name is Betty Matthews, and I wish I never took that trip to Monument Valley. What happened there changed our lives forever, and not in a good way. I am writing this from the Sunset Valley Mental Hospital, where the doctors say I need to process my trauma. Maybe they're right. Maybe telling this story will help me make sense of it all, though I doubt anyone will believe me. It all started in the summer of 1968. My husband Dick, our 12-year-old son Tommy, and I were so excited about our 2-week vacation. Dick had just bought this cream-colored Winnebago RV. It was a bit beat up with some weird burn marks inside, but we got it cheap, and that's what mattered. Dick was a photographer who loved taking pictures of landscapes, and Monument Valley, with its giant red rocks touching the sky, seemed perfect. I remember how Tommy's eyes lit up when we first told him about the trip. "Mom, can I bring my rock collection?" he asked, bouncing on his toes like he always did when he was excited. Of course, I said yes. How could I know that his love for collecting things would lead us into such darkness? Dick was different back then, too. Strong, confident, always ready with his camera. He'd learned photography in the military, and now he was finally doing what he loved. He had this way of making everything feel safe and possible. "It'll be an adventure, honey," he told me, grinning as he packed his camera gear. Before everything went wrong, before the nightmares and the screams and the things that shouldn't exist, we were just a normal, happy family chasing a dream in the desert. But sometimes, I think now, dreams can turn into nightmares faster than you can blink. I need to tell this story right, from the beginning to the end. Maybe then someone will understand. Maybe then I'll understand why we didn't listen to the warnings, why we stayed when everything inside me was screaming to leave. Let me take you back to that first sunset in Monument Valley, when our RV rolled to a stop, and we thought we were starting the perfect family vacation. The first sign that something was wrong came during that sunset. As Dick parked our RV, I noticed a coyote sitting on a nearby hill. It wasn't running or hunting like normal coyotes do, it was just watching us. Its eyes seemed too smart, too human-like. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and focused on setting up our camp. "Look what I found, Mom." Tommy came running up to me, his hands full of broken pottery pieces. They were old and had strange patterns painted on them. Just then, an old Native American man appeared from behind the rocks. He introduced himself as Joseph Running Bear, and his face got really serious when he saw what Tommy was holding. "Those shouldn't be disturbed," he said quietly. "Put them back, boy. This land holds old memories, and some of them are better left alone." Something in his voice made my skin get goosebumps. Tommy put the pieces back, but I could tell he was disappointed. That night I couldn't sleep. The desert wind made weird noises, almost like whispers. Then I heard it scratch, scratch, scratch right above our heads on the RV's roof. Dick said it was probably just tree branches, but there weren't any trees nearby. I finally fell asleep but had the strangest dream. I saw desert animals, coyotes, rabbits, and wolves, but they were walking on 2 legs, like people. They were looking right at me with eyes that glowed in the dark. I woke up covered in sweat. The next morning, Dick went out to take photos of the sunrise. When he came back, he looked confused. "Betty, look at this," he showed me his camera. In one picture, behind a rock formation, there was a dark figure standing there. But Dick swore nobody was there when he took the photo. Tommy started acting strange too. That night I heard him talking in his sleep, but it wasn't English. It sounded like the language Joseph had been speaking, Navajo. How could Tommy know words in a language he'd never learned? I wanted to leave, to pack up and drive away, but Dick said we were being silly. "We paid for 2 weeks," he said. "Besides, these rocks will make amazing photographs." If only we had listened to our gut feelings. If only we had left that very day. But we didn't know then that the worst was yet to come. On our 4th morning, I woke up to something that still haunts me. Our RV was surrounded by dead rabbits, arranged in perfect circles. Dick said it must be pranksters, but who would do something so cruel? While he was cleaning up the mess, Joseph came by again, looking more worried than ever. "You need to leave," he warned us. "The skinwalker has noticed you. It's not safe anymore." When I asked what a skinwalker was, his eyes darted around nervously. "They're ancient evil spirits that can take any form they want, animal or human. They're drawn to people who disturb sacred grounds." I might have thought he was just trying to scare tourists, but then something happened that I can't explain. I was making lunch in the RV when I saw Dick outside, taking pictures of the rocks. At the same time, I heard his voice behind me in the RV, asking where I'd put his camera lens. I turned around and there he was, my husband, standing in the RV, but he was also outside. Two Dicks, exactly the same, at the same time. I screamed and both Dicks came running to me. For a terrible moment they stood facing each other. Then one of them smiled, but it wasn't Dick's normal smile. It was too wide, with too many teeth. In a blink, it was gone, leaving my real husband holding me while I shook with fear. "Mom! Dad!" Tommy's voice called from outside. We ran out, but there was no sign of him, just his footprints in the sand, leading toward the rocks. Dick grabbed his flashlight, it was getting dark now, and we followed the tracks. "Tommy!" I called out. Then I heard him answer, but his voice came from two different directions at once. Dick went one way, I went the other. That was our biggest mistake, splitting up. In the growing darkness I heard Dick yell. Not a scared yell, but the kind of yell a brave man makes when he sees something terrible. Then Tommy screamed too, and I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. When I reached the spot where I heard the screams, I found myself in a small clearing between the rocks. The wind was picking up, throwing sand everywhere. In the dim light, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There were 3 Tommies standing there, all exactly the same, all reaching out to me. "Mom, help me," they cried in the same voice. "I am the real Tommy." My head was spinning. Which one was my son? Then I noticed something under my feet. The ground felt hollow. Looking down, I saw old bones partially buried in the sand. We had parked our RV right on top of an ancient burial ground, just like Joseph had warned us about. Suddenly, a huge sandstorm came out of nowhere. The wind howled like 1,000 screaming voices. Through the swirling sand, I saw Dick running toward me, but this time I just knew, it wasn't really him. Its movements were all wrong, too jerky, like a puppet on strings. "Betty," Dick's real voice came from somewhere behind me. "Don't look at them. Run." I turned and saw my actual husband. He had his camera strap wrapped around his hand like a weapon, standing between me and the creatures. "Get to the RV," he shouted. "I'll hold them off." "Not without Tommy," I screamed back. But when I looked at the 3 Tommies again, they were changing. Their faces were melting, stretching into something horrible. Their fingers grew longer, their eyes turned yellow. These weren't my son at all. They were monsters pretending to be him. The sand was so thick now I could barely see. Dick pushed me toward the RV, but I fought against him.
"Tommy!
I kept screaming.
Here's our son!"
Then I saw something in the storm, a small, still shape lying on the ground. My heart stopped. It was Tommy, but he looked dried up, like he'd been in the desert for weeks, not hours. Dick saw it too, and I heard him make a sound I'd never heard before, a sound of pure heartbreak. What happened next is still a blur in my mind. The skinwalkers were closing in on us. Through the howling sandstorm, their shapes kept changing. One moment they looked like Tommy, then like coyotes, then like something that shouldn't exist. Dick grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the RV. "I'll distract them," he said, and kissed me one last time. "When I do, run. Don't look back, Betty, just run." "Dick, no!" I tried to hold on to him, but he pulled away. He ran straight at the creatures, yelling and swinging his camera like a weapon. I saw one of them grab him, and then I did what he said. I ran. I somehow made it to the RV, my lungs burning from the sand. The engine roared to life, but the wheels just spun in the sand. I was trapped. Through the windows, I could see dark shapes moving closer. They scratched at the doors, making those same horrible sounds I'd heard on the roof nights before. Then Joseph appeared out of nowhere. He threw something at the creatures, it looked like powder, and shouted words I didn't understand. The scratching stopped. The storm began to die down. When the sand finally settled, I found Dick's camera in the dirt. Just the camera, Tommy's. Tommy's body was gone too, like they'd never existed at all. The police came, of course. They searched for days but found nothing. No bodies, no evidence. They said Dick and Tommy probably got lost in the desert. They said the sand must have played tricks on my eyes. They said a lot of things, but none of them were true. That's why I am here now, in this hospital. The doctors say I had a breakdown. Maybe I did. But every night, I draw the same symbols I saw on those pottery pieces Tommy found. I can't stop drawing them. Sometimes, I hear scratching on my window, even though I am on the 3rd floor. And sometimes, late at night, I see a coyote sitting outside my window, watching me with eyes that look too human. It's waiting. I know it's waiting. The doctors say with time, I'll forget what happened at Monument Valley. But they're wrong. Some things you never forget. Some things follow you forever. And if you are ever driving through Monument Valley, and you see an old cream-colored Winnebago with burn marks inside, drive away. Drive far away. And whatever you do, don't pick up anything from the ground. Because they're still out there, the skinwalkers. And once they notice you, they never let go. My name is Douglas Wheeler, and I am still trying to make sense of what happened that summer of 1979. Every time I look at the empty chair at our dinner table where Alice used to sit, my heart aches, and my mind goes back to Mount Rainier. I was a wildlife photographer back then, pretty good at my job too. My wife Carol was a naturalist who could tell you the name of every plant and animal in the Pacific Northwest. We had 2 amazing kids, Brian, our curious 15-year-old boy, who could fix anything with an engine, and Alice, our quiet 13-year-old daughter who always seemed to understand things beyond her years. That spring, I got an assignment to document wildlife in Mount Rainier National Park. We thought it would be perfect spending the summer together in our Dodge Sportsman RV, which I'd fixed up myself with a small darkroom for developing. Photos and a ham radio for emergencies. Carol could study the local plants, and the kids could have an adventure before school started again. Little did we know that this wouldn't be just another family camping trip. The first strange thing happened 3 days after we set up camp. I was checking my camera traps when I met John Running Wolf, an elderly Native American who lived near the park. He was tall and lean, with deep wrinkles that told stories of years spent in these mountains. He looked at our campsite, then at me, and said something I'll never forget. The old ones are watching you. They've been here longer than any of us, and they don't always like visitors. I smiled politely, thinking he was just trying to spook the tourists. But now, after everything that happened, I wish I'd listened more carefully to his warning. That was just the beginning of our story, a story that would change our family forever. It started with little things at first, things you could almost explain away, but not quite. One morning, we woke up to find strange structures made of sticks around our RV. They looked like tiny teepees, perfectly balanced and definitely not made by the wind. Brian said it must be other campers playing tricks, but Carol, who knew every local plant and animal, said something didn't feel right about. At night, Alice would sit by the RV window staring into the darkness. "Dad," she'd whisper, "I can hear them talking." When I asked who, she'd just point to the trees. I thought she was imagining things, but then I started hearing it too. Soft whispers in a language I'd never heard before, always just at the edge of hearing. The animals started acting weird too. Deer would stand still, as statues staring at our camp for hours. Birds would go completely quiet, then all start singing at exactly the same time. Even our normally brave dog Max would sometimes whine. hide under the RV for no reason we could see. But the lights were what really got to me. Every night, high up on the mountain, we'd see them dancing lights that couldn't be campfires or flashlights. They moved in ways that nothing should be able to move up there, weaving between the trees, and sometimes seeming to float right through them. John Running Wolf started visiting us more often. He'd sit by our campfire drinking coffee and telling stories about the forest. The old ones, he'd say, "They're curious about your family, especially your Alice." He'd look at her with worried eyes, like he knew something bad was coming. I remember the night everything changed. I was developing photos in my tiny RV darkroom when Carol called me outside. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. And there at the edge of our campsite stood something that shouldn't exist. It was tall, really tall, and covered in dark fur. But its eyes were intelligent, and when it looked at us, we all felt something in our minds, like it was touching our thought. Alice stepped forward before we could stop her. "I know you," she said. "I've been hearing you in my dream." That's when we realized we weren't dealing with just any Bigfoot legend. This was something much bigger, much older, and much scarier than anything we'd imagined. What happened next still gives me nightmares. The creature didn't move like anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't scary in the way monsters are scary. It was scary because it was so human. Like, but not quite human. It reached out not with its hand but with its mind. Suddenly we could all feel what it was thinking. Images flooded our heads, underground cities, other creatures like it, and histories older than any book could tell. Alice seemed to understand it best. She and the creature just stood there, having a conversation. None of us could hear. Carol grabbed my arm so tight it hurt Doug. She whispered, "Look at the animals." All around us, deer, rabbits, and even a few bears had emerged from the forest. They formed a perfect circle around our camp, standing completely still, like they were under some kind of spell. Then things got even stranger. The creature just vanished. Not ran away, not hid, just disappeared right in front of us. But we could still feel it there. Watching John later told us they could bend light around themselves like a chameleon, but Brian got really interested in all this. Maybe too interested. He started staying up late watching the forest with his binoculars. Dad, he'd say, "I think T hears more of them. I can feel them watching." One night it was Brian's turn to keep watch while we slept. When I woke up at sunrise to check on him, he was gone. His flashlight was still there, still on, pointed at the woods. The coffee in his mug was still warm. Carol was frantic. "We have to find him," she kept saying. But John Running Wolf shook his head slowly. "They've taken him to the deep places," he said. "T, here is more going on here than you know. The government," he paused, looking around. "Carefully, they've known about these beings for years. They've been hiding the truth." Alice tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, I know where Brian is. They're showing me." But her voice trembled. "I don't think they want him to come back just yet. They want to show him something important." That's when we heard the helicopters in the distance. John's face went pale. "They're coming," he said. "They always come when the beings make contact. We need to move now." I looked at my family, Carol's terrified face, Alice's knowing eyes, and realized our simple summer trip had turned into something much bigger than finding Bigfoot. We were about to discover a truth that some people would do anything to keep hidden. Everything happened so fast after that. John led us to a hidden cave entrance that even Carol, with all her knowledge of the area, had never noticed. Inside, the walls were covered with ancient paintings, showing tall, furry creatures walking alongside humans. "Quick," John whispered. "They'll be here soon." We could hear the helicopters getting closer. That's when Alice stopped walking. "Mom, Dad," she said, her voice different, somehow more grown-up. "There's something I need to show you." She placed her hands on the cave wall, and suddenly the whole cave lit up with a soft, blue light. The wall seemed to melt away, revealing a massive underground city. It was like nothing we'd ever seen, structures that looked both ancient and somehow more advanced than anything we knew. And there, standing in what looked like a meeting hall, was Brian. He was safe-talking, with several of the creatures we'd seen before. "They're not just hiding from us," Alice explained. "They're protecting something. Something important." She pointed to a glowing, crystal-like structure in the center of their city. "It's been here since before people. They're its guardian." Suddenly, we heard voices and footsteps, echoing from the cave entrance. Men in black suits with flashlights. John pushed us behind a large rock. "Go," he said firmly. "Take the back tunnel. It leads to the other side of the mountain, ill-handled." "But John," Carol started to protest. "I've lived a long life," he smiled, "and someone needs to make sure these secrets stay safe." Just then, Brian appeared next to Alice, as if he'd walked through the wall. "Mom, Dad," he said, "I'm okay, but I need to stay. They've shown me things, important things. And Alice," he looked at his sister, "they need her, too." That's when the first shots rang out. John was shouting something in his native language, and the cave started to shake. Through the chaos, I saw Alice step toward the glowing city. "No," Carol screamed, reaching for her. Alice turned to us, tears in her eyes. "I have to, Mom. I understand now. It meant to be a bridge between our worlds. They've been waiting for someone like me." The cave shook harder. Rocks started falling. Through the gap in the wall, we could see fires starting in the forest above. The government men were getting closer, and John couldn't hold them off much longer. We had to make a choice right there and then, and it was the hardest choice we've ever had to make. The next few minutes felt like a lifetime. Carol and I looked at each other, then at our children. Brian and Alice stood together holding hands, looking more grown-up than had ever seen them. "We have to let them go," Carol whispered, her voice breaking. She was right. We both knew. The cave rumbled again. Through the chaos, I could hear John's last words. "Run, save yourselves." Then came a loud explosion from the cave entrance. "We hugged our children one last time," Alice whispered in my ear. "Well, find a way to talk to you, Dad, I promise." Brian just nodded, trying to be brave. As Carol and I ran through the back tunnel, I turned for one last look. Alice and Brian were standing with the creatures, and for a moment they all seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Then the wall sealed itself up, looking just like solid rock again. We barely made it out of the tunnel before the whole mountainside seemed to catch fire. Later, the newspapers would call it the worst forest fire in Mount Rainier's history. The government blamed it on a lightning strike. Of course we knew better. That was 5 years ago. We still live near Mount Rainier in a small house with a view of the mountain. Sometimes late at night, we see those strange lights up there again. And every now and then, when everything is quiet, Carol and I get these feelings, thoughts, that aren't quite our own images of our children, happy and safe, learning things we could never imagine. Last week we found a stick structure in our backyard, just like the ones from that summer. Inside was a small crystal that glows blue in the dark. We knew it was their way of saying, "We're still here, we're okay." The government men never bothered us. Maybe they figured no one would believe our story anyway. Or maybe they knew we understood why some secrets need to stay secret. I still take pictures of wildlife, and Carol still studies the forest. But now we know we're not just looking at nature, we're looking at a hidden world, one that our children are part of. And sometimes on quiet nights when the moon is full, we sit on our porch and watch the mountain, knowing our family isn't really broken. It's just bigger than we ever imagined it could. My name is Patricia Reynolds, but everyone calls me Pat. I never thought I'd be writing this down, but I need to tell someone what happened last winter in the Boundary Waters. Sometimes I still wake up shaking, feeling the biting cold and hearing those awful sounds in my head. I am a wildlife biologist, and my husband Marcus used to be a park ranger. We were supposed to be doing a simple winter research project, tracking animal behavior during the coldest months. Our friends Howard and Emily Klein offered to guide us. Howard knew these waters better than anyone, or at least that's what we thought. We had this big 1975 GMC motorhome all fixed up for winter camping. Marcus spent weeks getting it ready, adding extra heaters, and reinforcing the windows. Better safe than sorry, he kept saying. If only we knew then how right he was about needing those preparations. The local Native Americans tried to warn us. I remember this old man at the general store grabbing my arm, his eyes wide with fear. The winter spirits are hungry, he said. They wait for people like you. I just smiled politely and bought our supplies. I am a scientist. I deal with facts, with things I can see and measure. Back then, I didn't believe in spirits or monsters. But after what I saw in those woods, after what happened to Howard, to Emily, to my Marcus, well, let's just say I believe now. And maybe, just maybe, if I tell you this story, you'll believe too. I should start from the beginning, from that first morning when the temperature dropped lower than anyone had ever recorded in Minnesota. It was the 15th of January. When we started our trip, the weather report said it would be 20 degrees, but it felt much colder. As we drove our RV through the snowy roads, I noticed something odd. There were no animal tracks anywhere. In all my years studying wildlife, I'd never seen the woods this empty. Howard was driving with Emily, checking the map beside him. Marcus and I sat at the small dining table going through our research notes. Everything seemed normal at first, but then Emily pointed out something strange. "Look at these trees," she said, her breath making little clouds on the window. "Those marks, they're not natural." We stopped the RV and I pulled on my heavy winter coat to check. There were symbols carved into the bark, deep angular cuts that looked fresh despite the freezing weather. Howard seemed worried when he saw them, but he just mumbled something about kids playing pranks and rushed us back into the RV. That night we parked near a frozen lake. The wind was getting stronger, making the RV creak and shake. While Marcus and I were preparing dinner, our radio started acting weird. Through the static, we could hear what sounded like singing or chanting, but in a language none of us knew. "Just interference," Howard said quickly, turning it off. But I saw his hands shaking as he did. Emily spent the evening writing in her journal, keeping close to the heater. She kept looking out the window, saying she saw shadows moving in the trees. We told her it was just the wind blowing snow around, but deep down I was starting to feel uneasy too. The temperature display kept dropping lower and lower. Our weather equipment must be broken. I thought it showed 40 degrees now. But all our backup thermometers showed the same thing. It wasn't supposed to be this cold. Not here, not now. That's when we heard the first scream, a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. Howard's face went white. He knew something we didn't, and I was starting to think our simple research trip was turning into something much darker. The next morning, things started getting really weird. Howard wasn't himself anymore. He barely touched his breakfast and kept staring out the window, muttering things none of us could understand. When Emily tried to touch his shoulder, he jumped like he'd been shot. We couldn't leave even if we wanted to. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, dropping so much snow that our RV was stuck. Marcus tried starting the engine, but it just made sad whining noises in the cold. Our radio only picked up the strange chanting, now louder than before, making my skin crawl. I found something, Emily whispered to me while the men were trying to dig us out. She showed me Howard's journal hidden under their bed. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. Inside there were drawings of the same symbol seen on the trees and notes about something Howard called the winter spirit. He'd seen it before 3 years ago. 2 hikers had gone missing that time. The food in our fridge went bad overnight, even though the fridge was working fine. Everything was covered in a strange frost, like it had been frozen and thawed over and over. We still had some canned food, but Howard started acting even stranger when we talked about rationing. "We won't need it," he said, staring at nothing. "It's coming for us anyway." That afternoon, the temperature dropped to 50. The windows of our RV were completely covered in ice. Not on the outside, but on the inside. We could hear things moving around outside, heavy footsteps in the snow that came right up to our door and then circled the RV. Emily spent hours trying to clean one tiny spot on the window to see outside. "There is something out there," she kept saying. something big. That night, Howard wouldn't come inside. He stood in the snow, not even wearing a coat, just staring into the darkness. When Marcus tried to bring him in, Howard turned around, and I'll never forget his eyes. They had turned completely white, like two balls of ice. That's when everything went from bad to worse. Emily disappeared first. We woke up one morning, and her sleeping bag was empty. There were drops of blood leading to the RV's door, which was wide open, letting in the freezing air. The snow outside had red trails that went into the dark woods. Marcus and I wanted to look for her right away, but Howard just stood there, smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. "She's with them now," he said, his voice sounding different, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. "Soon, we'll all join them." We locked Howard out of the RV that night. It was the hardest thing we'd ever done, but we had no choice. He wasn't Howard anymore. Through the frosted windows, we could see him walking in circles in the snow, his skin turning pale blue, but he wasn't shivering at all. The worst part was the noises. All night long, we heard screams that sounded like Emily, calling for help from different directions. Marcus had to hold me back from running outside. "It's trying to trick us," he kept saying. "That's not really Emily." Around midnight, the RV started shaking. Something was on the roof, something heavy that made the whole vehicle creak. We heard scratching, like huge claws dragging across the metal. Then Howard's voice came from right outside our window. "Let me in, Pat. I am so hungry, so very hungry." When I peeked through a crack in the window's ice, I saw him. But it wasn't really Howard anymore. He was much taller now, thin as a skeleton, with skin as white as the snow. His fingers had grown into long, sharp points, and his mouth. Oh God, his mouth was full of icicle-like teeth. Marcus grabbed our last flare gun. "We need to make a run for it," he whispered. "The ranger station is 5 miles south. If we stay here, we're dead." I nodded, trying to be brave, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. We put on all the warm clothes we had and got ready by the door. But just as Marcus reached for the handle, we heard it, the sound of not one, but many sets of footsteps crunching in the snow outside. They were all around us now. Marcus squeezed my hand and whispered, "Run straight for the trees. Don't look back, no matter what you hear." He pulled the door open, and the freezing wind hit us like a wall. The moment we stepped out, I saw them, 3 tall, white figures standing in the snow. One of them used to be Howard, but the others, I didn't want to know. We ran. The snow was deep and made running hard, but fear made us faster than I thought possible. Behind us, I heard that awful screaming again, and the sound of long legs rushing through the snow. Marcus shot the flare gun, and for a second, everything turned bright red. That's when I saw Emily, or what was left of her, hanging from a tree, her skin as white as the snow around us. The Wendigos, that's what they were. I know that now were playing with us. They could have caught us easily, but instead, they herded us away from the ranger station, deeper into the woods. The cold was so bad it hurt to breathe. My fingers and toes were going numb. "The cave," Marcus pointed to a dark opening in some rocks ahead. We ran inside, but it was a mistake. The cave was a dead end, and now we could hear them coming closer, their breathing like wind through icy trees. Marcus pushed me behind him as the first Wendigo appeared at the cave entrance. It was Howard, but he'd grown even taller, his arms nearly touching the ground. "I am so sorry, Pat," Marcus said softly. Then he ran at Howard with a burning branch he'd grabbed from our last flare. Everything happened so fast after that. There was screaming and the sound of ice cracking, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, Marcus was gone. There was just a trail of blood leading out of the cave, and the sound of the Wendigos feasting in the distance. I don't remember much about the next few hours. I just ran and ran, my hands and feet turning black with frostbite. Somehow, I made it to the ranger station. They found me curled up on their doorstep the next morning, half frozen but alive. Nobody believed my story, of course. They said it was hypothermia, shock, and something they called Wendigo psychosis. They found our RV months later, but no sign of the others. The official report says they got lost in the storm. But I know what I saw. And every winter since then, when the temperature drops too low and the wind howls at night, I think I hear Howard's voice outside my window, asking to be let in. He's still hungry, you see. They're always hungry.